Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
When my phone buzzed that morning, I knew it wasn't going to be a friendly reminder. Margot's name on the screen used to mean something warm, something familiar. Now it meant a barricade. I unlocked my phone with a sense of dread, and there it was, a text that felt more like a decree than a plea. Please don't come. Let's not make this about you. It was our daughter Ivy's 9th birthday. I paused, thumb hovering over the notification. For 8 birthdays, I had been there. Blowing out candles, handing her presents, and watching her laugh until her shoulders shook. Every year until this one, I had planned her parties, chosen the cake flavor, even picked out the perfect playlist of songs we both loved. But this year was different. This year, Margot had remarried to a man named Curtis, and suddenly I was an inconvenience. I stared at those words for a long moment. The house was silent. My children's laughter at breakfast had faded into memory. I felt the weight of my suit jacket on my shoulders and realized I was already dressed. I didn't argue. I didn't text back. I simply slipped my phone into my pocket, lifted the small gift bag from the table, and headed for the door. Every step beside my car felt heavy, but I kept moving. I wasn't going to let Margot's new life dictate my presence in Ivy's world. The drive to the country club was familiar, even if the reason I was going there felt alien. I thought about the text one more time. Please don't come, and wondered when the relationship that once brimmed with shared dreams had become a battlefield. I pictured Ivy's face as she tore open the paper wrapping, her fingers brushing over the homemade wooden memory box I had designed just for her. I tapped the steering wheel in a slow rhythm, reminding myself that love doesn't ask permission and that no new last name could ever overwrite mine in her heart. I pulled into the circle of valet attendants 20 minutes late. Of course I was late. Margot's timing always felt like another boundary, a way to remind me that I no longer owned the story. I parked, gathered the gift bag, and walked through the iron gate into a riot of pastel balloons and fluttering ribbons. The scent of fresh grass mingled with sugar and laughter. Parents in crisp linen and heels drifted in small groups, sipping champagne and making polite conversation. I felt their eyes shift, scanning my face with curiosity and thinly veiled disapproval. I paused at the edge of the crowd and watched Ivy. She stood beneath a canopy of pink and lavender balloons, wearing a dress dotted with tiny flowers. Her dark curls bounced as she ran her fingers over a row of chocolate cupcakes. She glanced my way, and in that moment, I saw in her eyes what Margot's text tried to erase, her father. The surprise in her expression melted into joy, and she took a step forward, ribbon in hand, ready to sprint into my arms. My heart thundered, and I closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. Before she could reach me, Margot intercepted. She stepped out with the controlled calm of someone delivering a verdict. Let's not make this about you, Micah, she said softly. The words were devoid of warmth, a formality disguised as civility. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile. I looked at Ivy and knelt, still holding the gift bag. Happy birthday, sweetheart, I said, my voice gentle. I got you something special. Open it when you're alone, okay? She nodded, eyes shining, and traced the edges of the bag with delicate fingers. I stood and took a deep breath. I wanted to say more, to remind Margot that I would always be her daughter's father, consequences be damned, but I held my tongue. Instead, I offered a polite nod to the gathering behind Margot and started to turn away. The air between us felt thick, as if I was pushing through water, but my decision was firm. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to plead. I was here to parent. As I crossed back through the gate, my steps slowed. I didn't look back. I could imagine the awkward hush that fell over the guests, the glances darting between Margot and Curtis. I pictured Ivy pressing her cheek against the cool wood of the memory box I had designed for her, a little piece of the past carved in love. I felt a tug in my chest, a bittersweet ache. This small act of defiance, showing up for my daughter, felt revolutionary. It was a statement. I am here. You cannot erase me. Outside, I slid into my car. I closed my eyes as the engine started, and for the first time since Margot's text, I felt something settle in me. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but clarity. I would always show up. No gate, no text, no second marriage would stop me from being Ivy's father. The road ahead felt uncertain, but I drove away knowing this. Some bonds, like the one between a father and his daughter, are unbreakable. And that simple truth always sustained me. The morning sunlight slanted through the blinds as I sat at my drafting table, surrounded by scraps of sanded wood and scattered tools. Each morning for the past 3 weeks had begun the same way, coffee in one hand, sandpaper in the other, as I shaped and smoothed the edges of the memory box I was fashioning for Ivy. I wanted it to feel like a treasure chest, sturdy and timeless. The kind of object that could survive a lifetime of bumps and tumbles, just like our relationship, scarred but unbreakable. Every curve of the wood, every hand-carved letter of her name on the lid, carried intention. This gift wasn't about showing off or making a spectacle. It was about ensuring that even if I was no longer invited to every moment, she would always have a piece of me with her. I had designed the box with 2 compartments. A shallow top section to hold tiny notes, doodles, and small mementos, and a deeper drawer beneath to keep photographs and charms. I sketched the layout in my notebook first, rough lines, annotated measurements, then transferred those plans onto the cherrywood plank I'd sourced from a local mill. I tested the drawer's fit over and over, adjusting a hair's breadth here or there until it slid in and out with a gentle glide. My fingers remembered the exact pressure needed for a perfect fit. Every detail mattered. After all, this box represented 8 years of birthdays, bedtime stories, scraped knees, and delighted giggles. It had to be flawless. Late in the afternoons, when the wood stain dried into a warm honey glow, I assembled the components. I pressed tiny brass hinges into place and affixed a delicate latch that clicked satisfyingly when closed. Then came the most personal task, carving Ivy's name in looping cursive across the top. My heart thumped as the first letter appeared, indented smoothly into the grain. Each subsequent letter felt like retracing our history. I remembered the day she was born, her perfect grin as she reached for my finger, her tiny fist grasping my thumb, and I traced that memory inward. Once the box was complete, I gathered 8 small charms, one for each year of her life. A silver star for the night she learned to read by flashlight after bedtime, a tiny paintbrush for the afternoons we spent making finger paint masterpieces, a soccer ball for the season she joined her first team and scored the winning goal, a music note for the piano recital where she trembled before playing and beamed afterward. Each charm was a token of a milestone we'd celebrated together. I nestled them carefully into the bottom compartment, lining the space with soft velvet that smelled faintly of lavender and promise. The top compartment held the other treasures, photos printed on matte paper, edges curled slightly from handling, notes folded into origami hearts, a pressed 4-leaf clover from the picnic we'd shared at the park, a dried daisy from the day she ran barefoot through a field of wildflowers. I slipped them in one by one, pausing to recall her laughter in each moment, the way her eyes shone when she discovered something new. I didn't need to write long messages, just a few words, enough to remind her that she had never been alone. You are fearless. Always be curious. Daddy's proud of you. Simple affirmations that would whisper encouragement whenever she opened the box. When I finished, I tied the box with a pale pink ribbon and placed it in a paper gift bag. The bag was sturdy, adorned with watercolor blooms that mirrored the flowers on Ivy's favorite dress. I tucked a handwritten note inside, for Ivy. When you miss me, open this and remember. I hesitated before sealing the bag, feeling the weight of every unspoken apology, every lost moment we'd never reclaim. But I also felt a surge of hope. This gift was more than wood and paper. It was a bridge back to my daughter's heart. That evening, I sat in my car a block from the florist, watching Ivy skip down the sidewalk with Margot and Curtis. Ivy held a bouquet of wild daisies that Margot had picked up on the way, bright yellow petals like small suns. I gripped the steering wheel, tasting a mixture of longing and determination. I thought about how Margot had said this gift would make things awkward, that it would make the day about me. But I knew better. It would make the day about Ivy. About her memories and her right to know that her father loved her beyond any boundary anyone else could set. I parked near the entrance to the garden and stood, gift bag in hand. The night before, I had rehearsed a simple line. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I love you. I didn't need more. And when I stepped through the gate, everything slowed down, the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. In that stillness, I saw her. Ivy looked up, her small face bright as she squinted against the sun. Her mouth curved into a grin so radiant it could have lit the whole party. She ran to me without hesitation, tugging at my hand. I knelt to meet her gaze and held out the bag. Happy birthday, Ivy, I said, my voice soft but steady. Her fingers brushed mine as she took the gift, her eyes widening behind their lashes. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. She squeezed my hand, then looked at Margot, who hovered nearby with a forced smile. But Ivy didn't notice her stepmother's glare. All she saw was her dad, and that was all that mattered. I stood and ruffled Ivy's curls. "Go on, open it when you're ready," I told her. She nodded, clutching the bag to her chest. I lingered a moment, watching the ribbon slide off the handles, the box revealed like a secret waiting to be discovered. Then I turned and walked away, stepping out of their world and back into mine. I didn't need applause or recognition. The memories we'd built together were enough. Ivy would carry them in her heart, and I would be there for every moment she chose to remember. In that simple exchange, I had reclaimed my place, not as a guest at a party, but as the one who mattered most. I arrived at the garden party 20 minutes late, hands cold around the handles of the gift bag. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I crossed the lawn toward the private enclosure behind the country club, where every detail had been curated to perfection. White folding chairs lined the aisle, pastel petals scattered across the grass, and a wrought iron arbor framed by climbing roses stood as the centerpiece. The air smelled of jasmine and freshly cut grass, mingled with the distant hum of lawnmowers from the green beyond. It was a scene plucked from a glossy magazine, the kind of idyllic setting people posted on social media to showcase the perfection of their lives. And yet, there I was, uninvited yet undeterred, stepping into a picture that had been designed to exclude me. I spotted Ivy immediately, her small figure dwarfed by the abundance of decorations. She laughed as a group of girls in tulle skirts chased one another around a fountain, their squeals of delight echoing off the garden walls. Her laughter was the same laugh I knew intimately, bright, spontaneous, unguarded, and it made my chest tighten with longing. I moved closer, fingertips grazing the ribbon on the gift bag, my heart thrumming like a drumbeat in my ears. This was a moment I had planned to savor. Her surprise, her delight, her hug that would remind me why I refused to stay away no matter how many texts I ignored, how many doors were closed in my face. But then I saw him. Curtis. He stood beside Ivy like a guardian, his posture relaxed and confident, one hand resting casually on her shoulder. He was dressed in a navy blazer and crisp white shirt, the top button undone, tie absent as if to convey a sense of easy authority. His dark hair gleamed under the afternoon sun, and his smile was practiced but genuine enough to fool everyone around him. He was everything I once was to Ivy, her protector, her playmate, her champion. It felt like arriving late to your own wedding and finding someone else officiating. I paused, inhaling deeply, willing the bitterness to recede behind the love I held for my daughter. I reminded myself of my purpose: deliver the gift, see her smile, and leave before emotions ran too high. But as I stepped forward, I couldn't ignore the swirl of spectators. Margot's friends in floral dresses, her parents standing at the edge of the gathering with polite smiles, colleagues from Curtis's work cluster chatting about last quarter's numbers. My presence disrupted a delicate equilibrium. Curtis noticed me at the same moment I noticed him noticing me. His eyes flicked up from Ivy's curls to my face, and for a heartbeat our gazes locked. A flicker of confusion crossed his features, an almost imperceptible crease in his brow. Before he recovered, smile polished, and extended a hand toward the nearest server for a glass of lemonade. Ivy followed his lead, content in his company, and turned back to the circle of children, whisking off in a swirl of pink tulle. I took another cautious step forward, and Curtis displaced himself to block my path, as though he believed physical distance could enforce an emotional barrier. Margot hovered behind him, her posture rigid, lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes followed my every move, narrowing slightly as if judging my entitlement to the space. Behind her, friends exchanged raised eyebrows, and I could almost hear the silent commentary. What's he doing here? Shouldn't he respect her wishes? I felt the weight of their assumptions pressing against me, insinuating that I was an interloper, a disruptor of carefully balanced niceties. But I didn't belong to their narrative. I belonged to Ivy's, and I had every right to be here. Curtis cleared his throat, voice polite but charged with authority. "Micah," he said, drawing out my name as one might address a subordinate or challenge an intruder. "Nice of you to arrive." His tone suggested a question, though his words were statement enough. I held his gaze, feeling the undercurrent of his possessiveness. Everything here was his domain now. His party, his daughter, or so he thought. His chance to prove he belonged more than I did. I squared my shoulders and lifted the bag, letting its weight ground me. "I'm here for Ivy," I replied softly, as if that simple declaration could override the unspoken rules of this gathering. "It's her birthday." Beneath the calm tone, my pulse spiked. I could feel Curtis's surprise ripple outward like a wave. He hadn't expected me to stand so calmly, so assuredly, by his side of that invisible line. Before Curtis could respond, a server appeared with a tray of pink lemonade. Curtis took a glass and turned the offering into a shield between us. He raised the glass in a mock toast. "To Ivy," he said, smile effortless. "Happy 9th." His voice resonated through the hush that had fallen over the guests. It sounded like an invitation to join the facade or to forever remain on the outside. I glanced around and saw the divided expressions, some faces painted with curiosity, others with disapproval. But then I looked at Ivy, and she looked back at me, eyes wide in recognition. Time slowed as she drifted toward me, separating herself from the group with the buoyant confidence of a child who belongs to both worlds. I knelt to meet her, drawing her into a hug that felt like home. The wind blew a loose strand of her hair across her forehead, and I brushed it back gently. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. She nestled against me, and I felt the tension in my shoulders unravel. Curtis lingered nearby, shifting his weight, uncertain whether to join or to bow out. Finally, he took a step back, relinquishing the space without a word. I straightened, holding the gift bag in front of her. She reached for it eagerly, and I handed it over with a smile that wasn't meant for anyone but her. The crowd parted as she tugged at the ribbon, and the box emerged like a secret treasure. I watched as her small fingers traced the carved letters of her name, her eyes glistening as she discovered each charm inside, as though she were unwrapping memories themselves. Curtis hovered but didn't intrude. Margot bit her lip but didn't intervene. For that moment, the garden belonged to Ivy and me. As the children resumed their games and laughter floated back, I stayed by Ivy's side until she finished exploring the box. Then, softly, I told her, "I'll see you soon. I love you." She smiled, her face illuminated by gratitude and wonder, and nodded. I stood, met Curtis's gaze once more, and turned toward the gate. My footsteps felt lighter, and I stepped through the archway into the sunlight, knowing I had fulfilled my promise, reclaimed my place in Ivy's story, and left behind ripples that would resonate long after I was gone. I stepped forward just as Ivy launched herself at me, her feet leaving the ground in a joyous leap. The soft thump of her small body into mine should have been all the celebration I needed, but before her laughter could reach my ears, a firm hand guided her sideways. Margot's grip was gentle but unyielding, and she whispered into Ivy's ear something I couldn't quite hear. The warmth of her daughter's hug was replaced by a formal distance, and Margot's calm, clipped voice cut through the party's chatter like a scalpel. "Let's not make this about you, Micah." She said my name as though it were the answer to a question no one had asked. The words hovered in the air, drawing a hush across the gathering like a wave pulling back from the shore. Time seemed to slow as I processed the restraint in her tone. There was no anger in her voice, only the cool authority of someone determined to control the narrative. Her eyes were steady on mine, unwavering, as though she believed she could confine my presence to the edges of Ivy's day. Guests paused in mid-laughter, forks halfway to their lips, glasses frozen inches from their lips. Even the birdsong in the trees seemed to falter. I felt the weight of every gaze, the polite but probing stares of friends who knew me only as the absentee father, and the curious looks of strangers sizing me up. For a moment, I wondered if I'd disrupted something fragile, a carefully constructed world where I was no longer meant to belong. But then I looked at Ivy. Her eyes were filled with unguarded wonder, that bright spark I had known since her first steps. She held the gift bag close to her chest, the paper crinkling under her small hands as though it contained the sum of my regrets and hopes. I focused on her, on the curve of her cheeks, the way her lashes cast tiny shadows on her face. I remembered the mornings spent teaching her to tie her shoes and the nights reading her favorite story until she drifted to sleep. That daughter, the one who knew my voice better than any other sound in the world, stood here, waiting to know that nothing could erase me from her life. I knelt beside her, lowering myself so that we were eye to eye. The grass was cool under my knees, dew clinging to my pant legs. I let the world blur around us until all I saw was her. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said softly, lifting the bag so she could see the neat ribbon and the edge of the box peeking out. My voice was calm and sure, carrying every ounce of love I had for her. She leaned forward, her hair brushing against my cheek, and reached for the handles. I felt the tension in Margot's shoulders, heard her inhale sharply, but I refused to look away from Ivy. Open it when you're alone, okay? I added, sliding a finger along the edge of the bag, pointing to the written note tucked inside. I love you more than anything. Ivy nodded, her lips curving into that radiant smile that could light up any room, even one filled with silent judgment. She pressed the ribbon between her fingers, her brows knitting together in concentration as she untied the bow. I straightened, rising to my full height, steady and confident for her sake. My jacket felt heavier now, weighed down by both expectation and defiance. I looked at Margot, at the controlled set of her jaw, the flush rising in her cheeks. I wanted to argue, to remind her that love doesn't require an invitation, but I stayed silent. This moment wasn't about her or Curtis or anyone else. It was about Ivy, and I refused to let their discomfort overshadow her joy. Behind me, the guests slowly resumed their activities, some offering polite nods, others returning to their conversations as though nothing had happened. The breeze stirred, lifting stray petals from the ground and carrying them into the air like confetti. Ivy finished untying the ribbon and lifted the lid of the box, her small fingers tracing each carved letter of her name. Even from here, I could see the awe in her expression as she discovered the charms and notes I had carefully placed inside. For a heartbeat, I felt as though the world held its breath with us, waiting for her reaction. Then Ivy looked up, a single charm dangling from her finger, a tiny silver star that glinted in the sunlight, and met my gaze. Her eyes shone with unspoken understanding. She smiled and mouthed the words without moving her lips. Thank you. And in that moment, everything else faded. I turned and walked away, stepping back through the wrought iron gate and into the warmth of the afternoon sun. I didn't glance over my shoulder. I didn't need to. Ivy had seen me. That was all the invitation I ever needed. The clatter of forks against fine china halted mid-swing the moment Curtis's voice reached them. I stood at the edge of the gathering, having delivered Ivy's gift and prepared to slip away, when he spoke the words that stilled the chatter in the private garden. Wait. Micah. His tone began casual, almost curious, but ended ripe with shock. The air shifted as plates froze and glasses hovered, droplets of champagne suspended midair. Curtis repeated it louder this time. That's my boss. The words echoed off the hedges, carrying far beyond this meticulously arranged party. I watched the ripple of surprise as everyone grasped that the man they dismissed wasn't just a guest. He was the VP of strategy at Centralogics. I held my expression, calm, unperturbed, allowing the revelation to do its work. No one expected the awkward hush to break, but when it did, it was with whispers and shuffles. A woman's breath caught behind me. Someone near the fountain murmured to a friend. I glanced at Ivy, whose fingers still toyed with the ribbon on her box, her eyes wide in innocent wonder. For her, this was another of my unpredictable surprises. But for the assembled guests, this was an upheaval of social order. Curtis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He ran a hand through his hair and attempted a laugh. Well, Micah Alden, VP at Centralogics. How long have you been with us? His casual smile faltered. I allowed myself a small, polite smile. Just over 3 years, I replied evenly. I joined shortly after Ivy was born. My words landed softly but carried weight. Behind Curtis, Margot's parents exchanged a glance of astonishment. Her mother, who had once dismissed me as a distraction, leaned in to whisper something to her husband. I caught. Strategy Centralogics never knew. Curtis took a hesitant step forward, perhaps to reclaim control. Well, that's unexpected, he stammered. He cleared his throat. I suppose congratulations are in order? His uncertainty was palpable. I inclined my head. Thank you. I wasn't there to gloat, only to assert a quiet dignity. Power, I'd learned, spoke through presence rather than pronouncement. A tentative round of applause swept through the guests, thawing the awkwardness. Faces brightened, conversations resumed with new topics. Business cards were exchanged. Someone popped open a phone to take notes on market positioning. Curtis looked at me, half amused, half chastened, as he realized the game he thought he controlled had slipped. Margot stood rigid, mouth a thin line, eyes pleading for me to leave. I glanced at her, then at Ivy, who skipped over to show Curtis a charm dangling from her finger. The tiny silver star twinkled in the sun as she exclaimed, "Look!" Curtis knelt with her, curiosity giving way to genuine pride. He examined the charms I had chosen, each one a reminder of years we'd shared. I leaned against the arbor, surveying the scene. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, just a simple truth laid bare in polite company. The quiet revelation was more effective than any dramatic entrance. Curtis glanced back at me once, offering a nod that blended respect and resignation. I nodded in return and turned toward the gate. As I walked away, I heard someone murmur, "Who knew?" followed by, "He's remarkable." Their words drifted after me, mingling with the rustle of leaves. I paused at the exit, looking back at Ivy's joyful face framed by balloons and laughter. She waved, her smile genuine, unaware of every head that had turned. Then I stepped through and closed the gate gently behind me. The gravel crunched underfoot as I made my way to my car. I held Ivy's memory box lightly in my hand and let the events of the party wash over me. It hadn't been loud or theatrical, but the seed of change had been planted. In that garden, between curated blooms and clipped words, a simple truth had taken root. I was more than an unwelcome guest. I was integral to this family's story, and nothing could erase that fact. As I drove away, the late afternoon sun glinted off the charm bracelet dangling inside the memory box, a reminder that some ties, once forged, are unbreakable. I lingered at the edge of the party long enough to feel the shift in the air. The garden's curated elegance. The pastel umbrellas, the showroom-worthy croquet set, the delicate china, suddenly felt like stage props in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Yet here I was, center stage whether they liked it or not. Curtis hovered nearby, still kneeled beside Ivy as she examined the charms from her new memory box. He looked up at me with an awkward smile, the kind you force when social niceties and personal pride collide. I crossed the grass toward them, steadying my breath. Ivy looked up and waved, her grin as warm as sunrise. Her innocence gave me courage. Curtis rose slowly, smoothing his blazer as though he could iron out the tension with a flick of his wrist. "Micah, forgive the intrusion," he began, voice pitched just a shade too high. "I didn't realize you, and, you two knew each other." His eyes darted around, as though searching for an escape hatch. I nodded, recognizing the discomfort behind his courtesy. This was a man accustomed to control, now faced with a truth he hadn't anticipated. "We go way back," I said, keeping my tone conversational. Long before the party tents went up. Beside us, Ivy tugged at Curtis's sleeve. "Daddy, can I show him the music note charm?" she asked, her voice rippling with excitement. Curtis's face softened. He loved her, I could see that. He looked from Ivy to me, a question in his eyes. I knelt beside her, and she held the tiny silver charm aloft, shaped like a lilting eighth note. "This is for the piano recital I played last spring," she explained, pointing to her father. "Remember, Daddy? You said I did great, even when I messed up the first bars." I smiled at her, wiping away the memory of tears she'd shed when she thought she'd disappointed me. "I do remember," I replied, reaching out to gently twirl the charm between my fingers before returning it to her. Ivy beamed, clutching it to her chest. Curtis rubbed the back of his neck, chuckling nervously. "That's incredible," he said. "I've heard nothing but praise for your work at Centralogics, Micah. It's surprising to see that he paused, searching for an adjective that wouldn't sound like a veiled insult. "So, hands on a dad." I met his gaze directly. "My career is important, but it never comes before her." Margot hovered a step behind, arms crossed. Her expression was carefully neutral, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her unease. I remembered her text. "Let's not make this about you." Yet here we were, making it undeniably about not just me, but about how my presence challenged every assumption she had tried to enforce. I let my gaze drift to the other guests. Margot's parents exchanging glances that mixed curiosity and regret, the women in summer dresses leaning forward slightly, and the husbands clearing their throats before continuing their conversations. They all registered the dynamic shift. The absentee father turned high-powered executive, the man they dismissed standing calmly in the wake of his own revelation. Curtis swallowed and gestured toward the refreshment table. "Can I get you a drink?" He forced an easy smile and steered the conversation towards safer territory. "They make a mean iced tea at this place." I shook my head. I'm good, I said. I'm just here to see Ivy. He nodded, and for a moment, I thought we might simply part ways with polite nods and continue our separate lives. But then Margot stepped forward, voice low but carrying. Curtis, maybe you should walk him out. Her words hung between us, heavy with old insecurities and new alliances. Curtis stilled, torn between loyalty to his wife and the realization that he had no real grounds to make me leave. I glanced at Ivy, whose attention had shifted to a cluster of children chasing butterflies. She was oblivious to the currents swirling around her parents' associates and stepfather. Her world was as simple and untarnished as a daisy in that manicured garden. I felt a pang of sorrow for how complicated adulthood had made her birthdays. But in that pang, I also found resolve. I wouldn't be chased away by veiled suggestions or polite entreaties. I belonged here as much as anyone who claimed title to her. Curtis exhaled, a faint surrender in his shoulders. He took a half-step back, offering me the tacit permission that Margot's words had tried to deny. I'll let you two catch up, he said, nodding at Ivy. He swallowed once more, then turned, slipping seamlessly into the throng of guests. I watched him go, a mixture of pity and admiration washing over me. He was trying, in his own clumsy way, to bridge two worlds. I had once stood in his shoes, uncertain, eager to protect, wary of being overshadowed. I understood him. But more importantly, I understood Ivy's need for both her parents to coexist around her without conflict. Margot exhaled, stepping forward. Her eyes were guarded but softer than before. Micah, she said quietly. Thank you for not making a scene. I gave her a small nod. I'm not here for you, I replied gently. I'm here for Ivy. Her expression flickered. Surprise, remorse, something I couldn't quite name. She looked at her daughter, then back at me, as if weighing the cost of war against the value of peace. Finally, she turned away to rejoin the guests, pulling her shoulders back in a gesture I recognized, surrender in friendship's disguise. I knelt beside Ivy once more, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. Her face lit up as she held out her memory box. Show me the photos, she whispered. I lifted the lid and pointed to the top compartment where snapshots lay, one of her grinning as she slid down the playground slide, another of us building sandcastles at the beach. Each picture carried its own story, and I described them one by one, my voice soft with nostalgia. She listened, eyes wide, nodding in recognition. When we moved to the bottom drawer, I took out the brass charm shaped like a soccer ball. She gasped. You remembered, she exclaimed. I smiled, tucking the charm into a loop of ribbon. I remember everything about you. We stayed huddled together, lost in shared memories, until the small hands grew tired of the box and we heard the distant call of her friends inviting her back to cake. She slipped the box into my jacket pocket for safekeeping, linking her fingers through mine. Thanks for coming, she said quietly, pulling me close. You're the best part of my birthday. My throat tightened at the sweetness of her words. She was 11 going on forever in her innocence, unaware of social politics, untroubled by divorce or remarriage. For her, this day was perfect because I was here. I stood and brushed off my knees, lifting her hand in mine. Together, we walked to the cake table where her laughter mingled with the rustle of party poppers and the soft notes of a string quartet. Guests paused to offer wishes, and Margot's forced smile softened into something almost genuine. Curtis appeared at her side too, hands full of cupcakes, and I caught his eye. He gave me a nod, no words, just acknowledgement. In that nod, I saw acceptance. Not total, not without reservations, but enough to allow me to play my part in Ivy's life without apology. As she blew out her candles, cheeks puffed with breath and eyes squeezed shut, I felt the awkwardness dissolve into something resembling harmony. The garden, with all its curated beauty, became a place of genuine connection. I would forever carry the memory of that day, not for the discomfort I endured, but for the moment when love outshone social pretense. And as I watched my daughter's wish drift upward in the wisps of candle smoke, I knew that no matter how many parties I crashed uninvited, no barrier would ever stand between us. When I arrived at my apartment the following Saturday, I expected the usual routine, drop my briefcase by the door, peel off my jacket, and collapse onto the couch with a sigh. But as I unlocked the door, I noticed a small piece of paper taped to the frame in Ivy's looping handwriting. I smiled before I even read it. It was her signature flourish, the way she curled the tail of her, "Why just so?" I peeled it off gently and carried it inside, my curiosity mounting. I set my bag down and smoothed out the paper on the coffee table. The drawing was simple, drawn in colored pencil. Two stick figures standing side by side in front of a tall building with several rows of windows. One figure wore a tie, the other sported a cape. Above them, in freehand letters, she had written, "Me and Dad. He's the real superhero." My heart lurched at the sight of it. The building looked like our old office tower downtown, the one where I had hosted her for Take Your Kid to Work Day, even though, officially, it wasn't allowed. I remembered how her eyes had grown wide at the sight of the sleek lobby, the polished marble floor that reflected the sunlight in a dazzling array, and how she clutched my hand as we rode the elevator to the 35th floor. She had insisted on wearing her purple cape that day, her official superhero uniform, she called it, and I had watched her burst through the doors of my office, so proud and fearless. In her world, I was invincible, and she believed that together we could conquer any challenge. I slid onto the couch and held the drawing in my hands, tracing each pencil stroke like it was a lifeline. The tie on one figure reminded me of my suit that day at the garden party, when Curtis had outed me in front of everyone as his boss. I had stayed calm, collected, unshakable, a superhero standing firm in the face of unexpected opposition. In the sketch, Ivy had given me a cape instead of a tie, swapping my corporate identity for something more elemental: protection, bravery, the kind of strength that doesn't reside in a corner office but in a father's unwavering love. I put the drawing on the table and retrieved the memory box from the pocket of my jacket. Inside was the tiny charm bracelet we'd assembled together, each charm a token of a shared memory: soccer balls, paintbrushes, stars, and more. Ivy had worn it every day since her birthday, and now I kept it here, safe. I opened the box and ran my finger across the velvet lining. The charms glinted in the low light, and for a moment, I felt that same surge of pride I had felt when she first discovered them. It wasn't just the gifts themselves, but what they represented: moments of connection, pieces of a life woven together by love and intention. I pressed the charm box closed and turned my attention back to the drawing. Part of me wanted to hang it on the wall, to preserve its honest proclamation of our bond. But I paused, considering its fragile nature. Instead, I rifled through my desk drawer and pulled out a frame I had bought during one of my trips to the art supply store. Store-bought frames never quite suited her drawings, but this one was simple, the kind that let the artwork speak for itself. I measured the paper against the glass, then carefully mounted it inside, taping the corners to prevent it from slipping. I admired the result: her drawing, suspended in its new home, waiting to catch the light. The next morning, I texted Margot to confirm our Sunday visit. She replied with a simple "see you at 2," followed by a smiley face. I wondered if she had seen the drawing, if she knew how it gave me strength. But I didn't bring it up. I wanted Sunday afternoon to be about delight, not confrontation. I slipped the framed drawing into the passenger seat of my car, alongside the memory box and a bouquet of wildflowers I'd picked up from the corner florist. I chose daisies, simple, resilient, their white petals edged in gold dust. They reminded me of Ivy's favorite flower crown she'd worn at last spring's festival. When I pulled up to Margot's driveway, sunlight danced across the windshield. I took a deep breath and grabbed the package of cookies I had baked earlier, chocolate chip, her favorite, and stepped onto the porch. Ivy swung the door open before I could knock, her grin radiant. "Daddy, you brought the cookies." She waggled them before my eyes like a prize. I laughed, lifted her into a kiss, and stepped inside, careful not to jostle the frame. Margot greeted me in the living room, her forced smile giving way to genuine warmth as she accepted the cookies. "Thanks, Micah," she said. "You know how she loves your baking." I nodded, glancing at the hallway where family photos lined the walls. I remembered how close we'd once been, before the divorce, before the remarriage, before the garden party that tried to rewrite our roles. Now, every interaction felt like a negotiation, a delicate dance between affection and decorum. Ivy tugged at my hand. "Come on, Daddy, I want to show you something." She led me to her bedroom, where the walls were plastered with colorful crafts and posters of her favorite superheroes. She hopped onto her bed and pulled open her closet door, revealing a hidden nook she'd draped with fairy lights. "I made this for you," she said, stepping back proudly. Inside the nook, hanging from a ribbon against the glittering backdrop, was my framed drawing. It shimmered in the soft light, the pencil marks bold and alive. Beneath it, She had placed the memory box on a small shelf she'd installed herself, next to her collection of storybooks. "Now it's part of my superhero corner," she explained. "Because you're my hero, Dad." I felt an ache in my chest, a mixture of joy and humility, so intense it left me breathless. I knelt in front of her, pulling her into my arms, careful not to disturb her delicate setup. "Thank you, baby girl," I whispered, pressing my cheek to the crown of her head. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." She hugged me back with all the fierceness of a 9-year-old who believed she could save her father from any heartbreak. In that embrace, all the awkwardness of parties and hidden resentments melted away. There was only us, father and daughter against the world, the lines of her drawing tracing a path back to my truest identity. I realized then that I didn't need grand gestures or dramatic revelations to prove my love. All I needed was her belief in me, her unwavering faith, captured perfectly in colored pencil on a single sheet of paper. Later, as I drove home, the drawing and the memory box riding shotgun, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me. No matter where life led us, corporate boardrooms or family gatherings, country club gardens or fairy-lit nooks, our bond would guide us. Ivy's drawing was more than art. It was a promise etched in childish handwork, a blueprint for my legacy as her father. And as long as she drew me wearing a cape, I would keep showing up, ready to be her superhero, one day and one drawing at a time. I arrived at my office on Wednesday morning intent on a normal day, coffee, emails, a strategic planning session with my team. The wallpapered conference room hummed with fluorescent lights and the soft buzz of computers booting up. My assistant, Jenna, waved as I passed her desk. Everything was business as usual. Until Curtis stepped into my office 10 minutes after I'd settled at my desk. He looked as out of place in the glass-walled suite as a spectator on a chessboard. His tie was loosened. His expression was unsettled. "Micah," he began, glancing down at the framed photo of Ivy perched next to my monitor. The sight of her grinning face seemed to steel his nerves. "Mind if we talk?" I inclined my head and waved him toward the leather chair opposite mine. As he sat, I closed my laptop, folded my hands, and offered him a calm nod. "Of course, Curtis. What's on your mind?" He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled, the kind of heavy breath you take when you're about to admit fault or vulnerability. I wanted to clear the air about the party," he said quietly, his eyes on his knuckles. "I feel like I owe both you and Ivy an apology. I handled things poorly." I studied him, seeing the tension etched around his eyes and the hesitation in his posture. This wasn't a corporate negotiation or a power play. It was a man admitting his insecurities. I rested back in my chair and gave him my full attention. "Curtis, the only thing you owe Ivy is honesty and respect," I said. "You didn't know who I was at first, and that's understandable. But I'm glad you came to talk." His gaze flicked up, relief and embarrassment warring on his face. "You know Margot always tries to keep everything calm and perfect," he said, voice low. "She told me not to make waves, to keep the new family happy. But I realized later that I'd let her shape my perspective, made me blind to what really matters." He paused, eyes on mine. "It's not about orchestrating an event. It's about being present for your daughter. You showed up without making a scene, and you reminded me that presence is the best gift." I leaned forward, the familiar click of my wristwatch reminding me of time slipping by. "Curtis, I'm not here to vilify you. We both want Ivy to feel loved. We just approach it differently." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to be a good stepfather," he confessed. "I care about her, and I worry that I'll never measure up to you in her eyes. That's why I tried so hard to protect her world." His gaze softened as he said this. "But I see now that I need to step back and let her have her relationship with you." I exhaled, understanding his plight as a newcomer in a pre-existing bond. "You're not replacing me," I assured him. "You're adding to her life. We don't have to compete." Curtis's shoulders relaxed for the first time since he'd entered my office. He ran a hand along the edge of my desk, as though anchoring himself to a new perspective. "Thank you," he said, voice steadier. "I want to work together. When she calls your name in her drawings, or wears that charm bracelet, it's not a rejection of me. It's a reflection of memories you share." He looked up, eyes earnest. "I'd like to invite us, to co-host her next celebration. Make it about her, yes, but with both of us supporting her." I considered the offer, picturing Ivy's delighted face and the peace it would bring. "I'd like that," I agreed. We spent the next half hour drafting a rough plan. A picnic in the botanical gardens, simple decorations, an invitation list that included her closest friends and both sides of the family. As we sketched ideas on a whiteboard, the tension dissolved into collaboration. Curtis suggested a kite-flying station. I added a photo scavenger hunt. We laughed when one of my PowerPoint markers squeaked during a sketch of a cupcake stand. Jenna peeked in once, raising an eyebrow at the unusual camaraderie but choosing not to interrupt. By the time I walked him to the elevator, we had a shared vision for Ivy's upcoming celebration, one that would honor her history and embrace her future. Standing in my office doorway, I turned to Curtis. The man who had once tried to keep me at arm's length now stood as an ally. "Thanks for coming by," I said, extending my hand. He shook it firmly. "Thank you for being open to dialogue," he replied, a genuine smile lifting his features. Then he pressed the button for the lobby and disappeared behind the closing doors. I watched the elevators glide through the shaft before turning back to my desk. On the screen, Ivy's name shimmered on the framed photograph. I sat down and breathed deeply, feeling a lightness in my chest that hadn't been there before. Curtis's visit had been unexpected, but it had set the stage for a new chapter in all our lives. One built not on exclusion, but on cooperation, respect, and the shared mission of loving a remarkable little girl who saw us both as her heroes. A year had passed since the garden party's thinly veiled battles and curt conversations, yet time had a way of smoothing rough edges when you let it. Ivy would turn 10 today, and her smile was as prophetic as it was bright, a herald of innocence and joy untainted by adult complexities. When I arrived at the small community hall just after noon, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting warm rectangles across the polished wooden floor. The room was modest, folding chairs set in neat rows, a scattering of balloons and shades of lavender and mint, and a table draped with a simple white cloth at the far end. There was no iron arbor, no curated flower arrangements. Instead, paper chain garlands made by Ivy and her friends hung from the ceiling, each link a tiny testament to youthful creativity. I stepped inside carrying a bouquet of daisies, her favorite, and a box of her beloved chocolate chip cookies. My suit jacket was tossed over my arm, my tie loosened. There was no need for formality today. I paused to take in the scene. Parents greeting one another with casual hellos, children darting between chairs, laughter rippling through the space like bird song. Curtis stood near the refreshment table, pouring juice into plastic cups with a practiced hand. His brief nod to me carried more warmth than anything he'd offered at the country club. Margot hovered beside him, her arms crossed in a habit I recognized as protective, but her eyes softened when they met mine. I set the daisies on the table and arranged the cookies in a neat circle on a paper plate. The scent of warm chocolate and fresh blooms mingled in the air. Ivy bounded toward me, cheeks flushed with excitement, her lavender dress swirling around her knees. "Daddy," she cried, wrapping her arms around my waist with a force that nearly lifted me off the ground. I held her tight, feeling the solid reality of her weight against me, proof that this day was a gift we both deserved. "Happy birthday, my brave girl," I whispered, pressing a kiss to her temple. She giggled, dark curls tickling my ear. Margot cleared her throat softly. "Micah," she said, voice gentle, I wanted to say thank you. For everything." Her gaze fell to Ivy, who was already examining the daisies. I nodded, letting her words settle between us. There was no grand apology, no sweeping gesture of contrition. Instead, there was acknowledgement, small but sincere. Which, after everything, felt more meaningful than any public concession. Curtis approached with 2 cups of juice and handed one to me. "Here's to Ivy," he said, lifting the cup in a toast. His eyes met mine with a genuine warmth. "To Ivy." We clinked plastic against plastic, laughter spilling between us. The tension that had once existed had dissipated, replaced by a shared purpose, celebrating the girl at the center of our lives. Ivy scampered to the center of the room where her friends had formed a circle. They broke into a spontaneous rendition of Happy Birthday, voices ringing bright and unself-conscious. I watched as she placed her hands on the edge of the cake, an uncomplicated confection of vanilla frosting and sprinkles, before I joined her, guiding her fingers to the candles. They were 10 slender flames, flickering bravely. I crouched beside her, heart swelling. "Make a wish, sweetheart," I said. She closed her eyes, lips puckered in concentration, and when she blew, the candles stuttered and went out in a plume of smoke. Applause rippled through the room, and Ivy beamed. She turned to me, eyes shining. "It's perfect, Daddy," she said, and at that moment the hall felt as grand as any country club garden. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and we surveyed the scene together, friends congratulating her, parents chatting amiably, Curtis offering cake to the youngest children. The air hummed with ease and inclusion. Later, as the celebration wound down and the last crumbs of cake were scooped away, I spotted a small bracelet of silver and brass peeking from beneath Ivy's sleeve. The charms caught the light: a star, a paintbrush, a soccer ball, a music note, and more. Every piece a fragment of her history with me. I knelt and said, "I see you've kept our collection close." She slipped her wrist into my palm. "Always," she replied. "It reminds me of everything we've done together and everything we'll do." Margot appeared beside us, placing a gentle hand on Ivy's other shoulder. She offered a smile that was at once shy and genuine. "You're a wonderful father," she said, voice soft. I met her gaze and nodded, understanding the weight of her words. They carried no resentment, only truth, that our partnership in parenting was real and strong. Curtis stood off to the side, giving us space, but his presence was steady. Later, as the guests began to leave, he clasped my shoulder. "Thank you for making today so special," he said quietly. "I missed this," he admitted. "I miss seeing her happy like this." I patted his hand. "She brings out the best in all of us." When the hall finally emptied and Ivy was safely tucked into the passenger seat of the car, she reached across the center console and took my hand. "Thank you for coming," she said, voice earnest. "I'm glad you didn't let anyone stop you." I smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll always come," I promised. "No one can erase that." Driving away, I watched her shoulder-length hair bounce in the breeze, sunlight glinting off the charms on her bracelet. I thought of that first uninvited arrival and the text that tried to keep me away. How many walls had crumbled since then, walls erected by hurt, by pride, by the need to control a perfect image. Yet every brick had been dismantled by simple truths. Presence over pretense, love over exclusion, a father's promise kept. As the town receded behind us and the open road stretched ahead, I felt a profound peace settle in my chest. The legacy I wanted for Ivy wasn't about lavish parties or grand declarations. It was about showing up, year after year, unasked but unwavering. It was about the quiet power of a memory box, a drawing framed on a shelf, a joint plan sketched on a whiteboard, and a birthday celebrated in a modest hall filled with laughter. It was about a father and daughter, forging their path together, creating a story that no one could erase. And as long as she believed I was her real superhero, I knew that legacy would endure, uninvited again and again, but always, irrefutably, present.